I've known you for some years now,
Yeah.
and your work has always been kind of around researching some heavy and difficult things sometimes. It's post-colonial history of Kenya.
Yeah.
And conversations with you are always very kind of interesting in this way, in the sense that when I was thinking about today's conversation, I think we're in agreement that there's a kind of history of Kenya with a capital H that is very state-sanctioned, that is very kind of nationalist in focus. And then there's a kind of people's history, right? And popular memory, and the kind of history that we remember, you know, from like 2007, for example, when we talk about our memory.
Yeah.
I don't ever foresee opening a text at the university and finding that as a center of like a history lesson about Kenya. What do you think a book like this does for growing a kind of alternative history, people's history?
Hey, let me tell you. Me, when I read this book, I was like, we need more of these books.
Yeah.
Like, we need more of these books. And as I was listening, I mean, you're right, there's not a lot of work on the PEV. But also, these kind of events, a group of academics called the PEV, the Kenya Crisis, in 2008. I think even before PEV was gobbled up as a name.
Right.
Kenya has had many of these moments, actually, that we haven't really seen work on, or even really kind of discussed, kind of had a national discussion about it. The major one, of course, is the Mau Mau,
Yes.
right? In the 50s, which also spans, you know, the writing careers of a few writers. You know, Ngugi, for example, is obsessed with the Mau Mau. But even that conversation, 50 years, almost 50 years later, there were still questions around, should Dedan Kimathi have a statue
Right.
in Nairobi?
Exactly.
You know, and therefore, I understand why people would struggle to make sense of these very catastrophic events. Writers or people who went through it, or both, academics even. I think it's actually the late Binyavanga who said that the defining texts of these kind of moments, usually they come maybe from another generation altogether. The defining text of the World War II came from another generation. It would probably come the kids who are now 13. So that's actually usually what happens. Sad, but it's usually what happens. But it's even worse for a country like Kenya, that there's even like a policy for forgetting. You know, there's a gap. So there's actually work that will be done to suppress
Right.
a memory of such events. And it's also because Kenyan history it's really, there's denial, there's amnesia, but it's really because the political class does not really want to address the original sin, you know, because it will roll back the gains that such families have made. I mean, the country's still being run by the same families from the 1960s. That tells you something. There's a lot that's at stake.
Yes.
And therefore, this policy of suppressing memory and suppressing the real history, as you put it, is a real thing. It's not that people are lazy, they don't write books or don't want to do this work. It's because someone might actually prevent you from doing so, especially in a proper manner. You know, what is this thing called now? Is it BBI or BB? It's again, it's part of that same thing of let's forget and move on without really addressing, you know, the questions that have really messed this country's history. And I think, like, from this book, when I was reading this book, I didn't know it was like the PV was a surprise. I was like, oh, okay, that makes sense.
Right.
I really didn't expect that to be there at all, you know, because I think at some point I thought Ngugi was going to give up on his political career. And then, you know, the politics just ends, right? And then we stick to the stories of the family, or the story of the family. But then here we are, 2007, Kavata is away, and the country is basically falling apart.
Yeah.
It was so surprising, in the same way that it was surprising when the
At
PV
the
was
time.
happening.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.